friends. Thanks for taking time to listen in on part 2 of a conversation Dick and I had about the Brazilian Grand Prix, US Grand Prix in Las Vegas, and the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. John couldn't join us for this discussion, but Dick and I made sure to connect for this final month of racing in the 2023 calendar. As you'll hear, we both think this month's races reinforce the historic aspect of this moment in F1, both as a result of this year's newest race on the calendar, Las Vegas, and Red Bull's continued dominance. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Yeah. So do you think then, kind of going through those teams, but looking at the whole grid, do you think the teams can catch up to Red Bull, or is their development, their design lead still quite significant that it's still going to be a done deal next year? I know you kind of touched on it, but I'd like you to kind of go a little bit further in answering that question.
I mean, they've got to be the odds-on favorite, right, for 2024 to be the constructor champion and the driver's champion again. That said, I don't think they're going to have that easy of a time of it. I think, they won every race but one this year. And I just don't think they're going to, they may actually have to break a sweat. I think Ferrari and McLaren are getting closer. And to your point earlier, Ferrari, they've been under the hand of Fred Vasseur this year. And he's been the steady hand that they want and have been looking for so long. And as the season went on, that steadiness and that demeanor have carried over to the rest of the team. And if you notice, they committed fewer blunders as the season wore on. And I think it was because of his influence. And so I think, you eliminate some of the early season strategy blunders by Ferrari, and Mercedes does not finish second in the World Championship. It's not even not happening. Yeah, I think Ferrari and McLaren are going to be a problem. Assuming the new design from Mercedes does what, supposedly hits its targets, let's put it that way. Assuming that is, that Mercedes knows how to win. And they are dying to go in and take it to Red Bull. That they are. I mean, Toto Wolff is too much of a competitor. And of course, Christian Horner is a massive competitor too, so not going to underestimate them. Zach Brown clearly is a huge competitor, so McLaren's going to be there. I think we potentially could be in a situation where we could see maybe as many as 4 different cars winning, maybe 5. Yeah, and I'm saying that because Aston Martin is coming with a completely new car that is designed to eliminate the areas that were inhibited by this year's car for development. There were just certain things that were designed that you would have to completely change the tub or something like that. And this is the first car that Dan Fallows, who's the technical director there at Aston Martin, this is the first car that he's actually got his fingerprints on. And so he's ex-Red Bull. Adrian Newey was not happy about Fallows leaving for Aston Martin. So, let's say there may be 5 cars that could contend. I mean, let's face it, if the Aston Martin does take a step forward and you have Fernando behind the wheel driving the way he was driving this year, I don't know. I mean, he should have won Monaco this year. If they hadn't blown their tire strategy, they would have won Monaco. So, it's,
I agree with you. I do think that watching Max's face today at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix when he was being interviewed by David Coulthard, and then when he was standing and receiving his trophy, I don't know, maybe I was imputing my own thoughts onto him, but he seemed very uncharacteristically emotional, and it almost it hit him like a ton of bricks that this could be the last time that he's going to have this type of feeling where he's just kind of cruising and not worrying, the whole at the end of the race, oh, that was lovely, after a while I'm waiting after every race, I'm like, okay, where's Max's lovely going to come in, it's comfortable, he's going to have to work. And I don't necessarily know that he dislikes that, in the sense of he's clearly a competitor. Even in Las Vegas, he was fighting so hard, and he wasn't going to give it, he was like, I'm going for it. So, and you almost have to think, for someone of that type of skill and craft, you don't want to just kind of walk away with every race. You do want to be pushed, and the other teams, and that's what I would hope next year we get. It would answer a lot of these people who are saying that they're kind of over F1 if we were able to see what we're hoping by looking at the development tea leaves. Could it be that there's going to be some really good competition, which leads me then to actually how it all ended up at the end of this year. If you're a team principal, should you be pleased? Obviously, if you're Red Bull, I don't think that's a hard question, but easy. In general, right? But how do you position your team for next year? And how are you speaking to your leadership, i.e. your investors, about the results? So let's just kind of go down the list, not really in any particular order. Red Bull.
I mean, for Red Bull, I mean, let's face it, their Christmas party is going to be awesome. I would like to get invited because it's going to be amazing. You know, I mean, because let's face it, other than Singapore, they destroyed everybody. You know, I mean, yeah, I mean, it was a historic year. I mean, the last time that I witnessed this kind of, you know, just complete domination was McLaren in the late 1980s. And the only reason they didn't win a race was because, you know, one car broke down and the other car tripped over a car they were lapping. So, you know, I mean, they, you know, McLaren had that deal at Monza where they lost, and this time Red Bull lost at Singapore. And other than that, I mean, it was just sort of like, yeah, well, racing is pretty predictable this year. So they're got to be feeling really, really good, I'm thinking.
McLaren.
You know, again, McLaren has to be feeling really good because they know that they're directionally correct, right? They came out with their car before the car ever turned a wheel. They said, hey guys, guess what? We got it wrong in the wind tunnel. We know we've got to fix some things, but you know, the car's going to come right. Sure enough, man, as the season went on, it came right, and they've got two really good drivers. So they've got to be feeling good. Now, they can't rest on their laurels. They're going to have to continue to dig because they're still short of Red Bull. But, you know, I think Red Bull doesn't have as much to squeeze out of their car as the other guys have to squeeze out. So if they can, you know, squeeze some more speed, and that applies not just to a McLaren, but all of them, if they can squeeze some more speed at a rate quicker than what Red Bull can do, and I don't think Red Bull has a whole lot more they can squeeze out of that car, you know, that gap's going to close down.
Alfa Romeo.
Man, oh man, you know, that was a really weird season for them, right? They fell down the chart in the point standings. You know, they ran an evolutionary car from what they had in 2022, and it was almost sort of like, we're not going to be Alfa Romeo after this year. You know, we're going to be Audi. Yeah, let's just get through the season. You know, one of those kind of deals. And of course, you know, they lost a lot of leadership. You know, and so that's probably part of it. There's probably some serious revamping that's going to happen as Alfa Romeo goes off into the sunset and Audi comes on board. And certainly their new team principal is seriously capable fella. So in Andreas Seidel. So it'll be interesting to see how they turn it around for next year.
Mercedes.
Well, you know, P2 is not going to be good enough for those guys because they're used to winning. That's all there is to it. However, given this year and the car that was so recalcitrant, we'll use that word. It just, you know, sometimes it was good, sometimes it was horrible. So what car are we going to have this weekend? One of those kind of deals. They have to be breathing a sigh of relief. I mean, those 3 points that they won P2 from Ferrari over, that was millions and millions and millions of dollars. So, you know, I'm sure that they were happy to have that. But again, those guys are used to winning. And like I said earlier, if they get this new car right, they're going to be tough because there's such a well-oiled machine and they've got such great facilities and leadership. You know, Toto Wolff is just, I think, an amazing leader as well as you know, Horner or Vols or any of those guys. So I think at the end of the day, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how good the new car is.
I also think it's interesting when we look at the points and who got the most of those points too. And I think it was really wise of Toto to make sure that he re-signed Lewis.
Yep.
That really did help them. And I'm not saying that George isn't good or any. I actually think that George has a lot that he brings to the team. But I think that having Lewis again, especially because I think one of the earlier conversations the three of us have had about the Nikki loss, Toto having Lewis there, I think helps. And you don't need some of the chaos and stuff that we see on further down the field. I'm glad that they have that continuity of the years when they were winning. And I think that when you say that they're relieved for P2, largely because Lewis was able to push in for, I say that because I feel like there are a lot of Lewis detractors, and I'm not rooting against him, and I'm not rooting for him. I'm just like, I acknowledge what he has brought to the sport, and I'm very grateful to see his ability to do what he does. And that, I think, is proven by where Mercedes has ended up at the end of this year. Yeah. Okay, so
and
then
the other
go
thing
ahead.
that I'll
Sorry.
add about Mercedes, just one other point. Mercedes was the only team where their drivers wound up tied in the qualifying battle.
Oh, yeah.
Which is pretty amazing, which says that Lewis is being pushed by Russell. There's no question about that. And so that's really good. And good on George. You know?
Yeah. Well, and I think even today, George said at the Abu Dhabi, he's been sick for the last few weeks. So that also, I mean, what I have thought to myself, with the level of this calendar, the volume of travel, and all the different stuff these people are doing, the fact that they aren't more ill is in of itself a testament to a lot of the nutritional and athletic aspect of, for people who don't think it's a sport. I'm like, yes, it is. They're working very hard to preserve their bodies.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, so I say that to I'll only tip my hat to George that he's able to really, as you noted, push Lewis, and for them to really be matched so well. Okay, so then AlphaTauri, what do you think about them?
Yeah, so, again, this is another team that wound up being directionally correct. They started the year off not very good. They had the chaos of the Nick DeVries debacle, all the chaos of bringing in Ricardo only for him to crash and break his wrist. So they bring in Liam Lawson. Lawson does a fantastic job, really shows that he deserves to be in F1. Ricardo comes back, obviously has been doing good work with them. Yuki turns in an amazingly strong drive at Abu Dhabi to kind of finish the season on a high note. There's a lot of things to point to that, hey, you know what? We're kind of in the right direction. We were lost at the beginning of the year, but, we developed the car. We're looking good for next year. And they're going to be rebranded with some heretofore unknown American company. I had originally heard that it was going to be Hugo Boss, which is not an American company to my knowledge. But some other company apparently has come in. And so the AlphaTauri name is going to go off into the sunset.
Aston Martin, what do you think Lawrence Stroll is saying to himself and to his team?
Well, I think he's doing the happy dance probably because his own personal net worth has gone up a lot, and the Aston Martin brand obviously has been, a lot of the luster has been restored to that brand. I think I think that the future is looking really good for these guys. They've got a brand new facility to be working out of instead of 3 different buildings, and instead of subcontracting out a lot of the, manufacturing and all that kind of stuff, they're actually going to do it in-house because this new facility will allow that. They have a new wind tunnel coming online, I think in May of next year. So that's going to be a huge thing for them. So I think the future is really bright, and if this new, clean sheet of paper, Aston Martin that we're talking about works, and, Dan Fallows has been quoted as saying, yeah, it's meeting all our targets. And Alonso's like, yeah, I'm really happy with what I'm seeing so far. They may be looking really, really good. If they come out and surprise people like they surprised everybody at Bahrain last year, that could be fun.
Yeah.
Because I tell you what, you give Alonso a car that's sort of competitive, sort of maybe not the best car, but the second or third best. That guy has a way of eking out wins that probably shouldn't happen. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think so. And even if Lawrence decides, mid-year he's done, he walks away, sells it, he's made such a smart growth. I mean, just looking at that aspect of it, right? Because we keep seeing these different news pieces talking about the viability, the financials of it. I'm thinking this guy should walk away with tons of profit and be very happy of when he entered in and how he's ended up, the good entry and exit. He's smart. So I think this year, smart. Williams, you've mentioned them a little bit before, but what would you be saying if you were James Vowles?
Well, I mean, they're the little engine that could, right? They're probably the smallest team in terms of personnel and probably budget now that Haas has, that big infusion of cash. I mean, they've just punched above their weight for many, many races. And like I said, I think Alex Albon has proven that Red Bull was right about him several years ago. They were wrong, probably to get rid of him. Certainly, he has shown himself to be somebody that's really, really strong. And I would think, not obviously for 2024, but for 2025, if he keeps driving like that, he is not going to be at Williams. He's going to be somewhere else. So yeah, I think Vowles needs to feel very, very pleased. I think, his leadership has been exemplary. He has clearly created that culture of everybody working together as a team and really enforcing the idea of a team. I mean, you just don't hear about any drama or anything like that going on. It's like he's put his arm around everybody's shoulder and said, "Okay, guys and girls, here we go. We're in this together." And I sense he's a servant leader, quite frankly.
Yeah, totally. I do too. I mean, some of the stuff that I had read earlier in the year had noted that he was making an effort to talk to every single staff member, like actually having a one-on-one, no matter what the role. And then as you were talking, it made me think of what the Braun GP documentary had highlighted about how close knit and everybody. Have you watched it yet?
No, I have not.
Oh, you have to watch it, Dick. It is so good. I mean, I wish the pacing had been a little bit faster, but I'm so glad I stuck through it because it talked about how everybody truly banded together where no role was too small. There was it like kind of like they flattened out the hierarchy, but then they had a hierarchy. It was just this scrappy little group. And since I didn't watch Formula One back then, right? Like I'm learning based off of this. And I can see now, as you were talking, it made me think of some of the characteristics that I believe made Braun successful that they highlighted in the documentary. I can see that Vowles is probably trying to instill that same type of culture inside of Williams. And then in between, obviously, though, he's had the Mercedes time and taking the things that he's learned from Mercedes's success, which is why when you say you think Alex will go off to another team, I'm like, no, I want Alex to be the thoroughbred horse that can pull them and really get to shine his light there, because he was willing to stick it out with the team in the back, drive them, along with the rest of the leadership forward. So that's where I would hope that if they're having their meetings and they were listening somehow to our podcast, be like, no, don't let Alex get out of your hands. Like, keep him in there. So then let's move to Ferrari.
Again, you just got the feeling that they hit the numbers on some of the development because the car definitely got better as the year went on. The strategic mistakes that were made early in the year and of course all through last year, they became less and less. Some of the desperation or hysteria that you just kind of sensed was there. I did not sense that in the last third of the season, maybe something like that, last 20% of the season. And like I said, I think it is that Fred Vasseur has come in there, and I think he's just done a really good job of starting to change that culture and manage expectations and those sorts of things. So, I think if they have a good off season, they should be really, really strong. Certainly they've got two terrific drivers.
Haas.
Yeah. So, of course, I would love to see Haas do well. They've got such an interesting model, the way they go about their racing and all that kind of stuff. But, they were absolutely destroyed in the development war this year. They came out with the car that was an evolution of last year's car. Really, they were not very competitive all year long. They came out with a new package that they said, oh, this is the package that's really going to move us forward. This happened at COTA for the U.S. Grand Prix. And they kind of discovered that the car really wasn't all that great. And it really wasn't a step forward. And in fact, after Abu Dhabi today, Nico Hulkenberg was interviewed, and he said, Kevin ran the car with the COTA package. I ran the car with the original spec. I actually made it to Q3, even though our models said that I should never make it out of Q1. And he said, it just goes to show that we really lost our way in development. And if you look at the car, it is way different than what any of the other cars look like. just, you know, the way the side pods are crafted and all that. It actually looks like the side pods that were on last year's Aston Martin. And we know how ineffective that car was. And so, yeah, I mean, they just aren't staying on top of it. And so I think they really have to do a big time rethink about how they're developing the car as the season progresses.
I just would hope that they will take the time to really have those hard questions internally, but not in a blame way. Yep. I do think it's interesting that Nico and Kevin, that was a really smart decision of them to bring them into their driver lineup. I wasn't sure how I felt about it at the beginning of the year,
right?
But with their development, as you said, they're going down the development war. By at least having seasoned drivers, they were able probably to see that better versus the blame going on the driver. Yep. Okay, last one, Alpine.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, as our friend Dave would say, they're probably happy with sixth.
And you know what? Looking at the numbers, I think that he might be onto something, because there's a pretty big gap between Alpine and their bottom of the grid and the top of the grid. They walked into Abu Dhabi today kind of not really worried. I think they didn't have to be aggressive, but that's kind of sad.
Yeah. I mean, they were racing for nothing, basically, you know, and so I think they have been in chaos all year. I think the cars are actually pretty good. They've got good drivers. The engines are pretty good. They may not be they're probably the third most powerful engine on the grid, but not by much. But because of the leadership and the chaos, and they don't have a full-time team principal, they've got an interim team principal. So how much power do they have? Probably not much. It's a classic MBA course in what not to do in an organization. And you'd love to see them get it together, but I mean, history would suggest otherwise.
So let's do some discussion on our two rookies from the season, Piastri and Sargent.
Yep. So obviously Piastri is he's a star of the future. I don't think there's any question about that. He's already pushing Lando. He's just getting stronger and stronger as the year goes by. He's more and more confident. Let's face it, he won the sprint race right down in Brazil. So, you know, in a way, not really, but in a way, he's won a F1 race before Lando. Now he knows the tracks, the schedules, you know, how things are laid out in the garages, how the switches work on the steering wheel, you know, all those little minute things. That should set him up for success next year. Now, he may have a sophomore slump. It's possible. We'll see. You know, my guess is that he'll probably work like crazy over the off season, and he's just going to come back stronger. So that's what I'm hoping, because I would like to see that young man do well.
I feel like his personality is to not go the sophomore slump,
right? Because
it was that slow burn in. He just seems. Talk about James Vowles being even keeled. Yep. I feel like that's Oscar as well. Just watching him do his media stuff, he just he walks with a gravitas that belies his age. And I don't know if that's innate, like his own nature, or that's the development of him and like his team that has, you know, helped him to get into the seat, have trained him to be that kind of calm. Maybe it's both. Maybe it is nature and nurture that has enabled that. So I like your hypothesis more than the fear factor of a sophomore slump. Okay, then let's talk about our other rookie, Sargent.
Yeah, so, you know, it's really funny. There's a lot of people out there that just want to hate on Logan, but I'm not one of them. You know, I don't ever want to see a young guy come in to anything and be set up to fail. And I think because of the way James Vowles, again, has figuratively put his arm around Logan's shoulder, I think that he's pushed him, but he's also done everything he can to nurture him as well. And I think that, you know, we've seen here in the last few months where Logan got past all his crashes, and, you know, I mean, I know his crash damage bill was big, but he learned from them. And we need to remember that not all of his crashes were his fault. There were certainly hydraulic failures and stuff like that pitched him off the track. But having said all that kind of stuff, you know, I think that he showed enough as the season went on where he was getting closer and closer to Albon in terms of his lap times. And I've already said, I think Albon really should be considered for driver of the year. I think that Sargent actually acquitted himself pretty well, given that he had one season of F2. He was probably moved in the Formula One probably a year early. But I think he's earned the right to be out there. And it sounds like that's going to be the intention of Williams, which I love, because as an American, I really like the idea of an American driver, and I'd like to see him do well. But I want him to be somebody who's, who has a shot at being, I'm going to say competitive, even though we understand that he's driving a car that is not going to win races.
I agree with you. I mean, I'm definitely not one of those people who's wanting to hate on him. When I look at the comments, especially in social media, it just really frustrates me, because I feel like I have learned so much from you and John explaining to me what the path of F1 looks like, and how the preponderance of them are not coming from the US. And then you add in the US factor, and knowing the uphill climb that Logan has had. And then, with the De Vries stuff that happened this year, and then even Liam Lawson coming in here and people equating him to those. And then even I've seen stuff, people talking about Latifi. I'm like, yeah, that's all different. And I'm not trying to make excuses for Logan, but I just feel like there are glimmers, flashes where I think you should see his ability. I had watched this week something about Formula Japan, and that gave me some insight, I feel like, about why Liam was so good right into the car, and the car specs and how they are different, or more, there's some higher similarities to an F1 car. Right. And I thought to myself, when you just were speaking, Logan didn't have that. And just those of us who are not racers can't fully grasp that small differential that happens. And I think it was actually during the free practice at Abu Dhabi when I was listening to the commentary about all the rookie drivers and them discussing, the challenge of now they're going to have to go back and drive F2 cars. And someone said that's actually a harder the downgrade going back of that power. Now you've been on the edge, the knife edge, and seen it in an F1, felt it in an F1, now coming back into an F2 car. It's going to be a little bit of a shocker. And so as I was listening to that, I thought, all the more I respect what Logan has tried to accomplish this year, that you haven't had a lot of road time, and you're going into an F1 car, and it's not like you're driving a car that's at the front of the grid. It's got inherent challenges. I would hope that they would give him at least one more year, but then I also know there's politics and money and all that stuff that can come into play. But I do feel a level of hope, because it's vowels and not Helmut Marko,
Exactly.
that maybe Logan has a little bit more of a runway. But in a year, I don't know, if you don't see the improvement, this is a sport, and you do need to have the best that you can. And the free practice sessions showed us some really good drivers. And we've got rookie drivers that are signing in for reserves and all that. But I would imagine Logan knows that and wants to come back and represent himself first, and then everyone else. Really,
he was beaten in qualifying by Albon 22-0, right? So if that was the statistic that you based everything on, it'd be kind of like, he needs to go. But and you throw in all the crash damage, right? But then the other side of it is Williams has invested a full year in this young man. That's a lot of money, man. And so do you really, really want to bring in another rookie who is probably going to be on a very steep learning curve, just like Logan, and you're going to go through kind of sort of the same thing? Because you're probably not going to be bringing in the next Oscar Piastri. You're just probably not. And so when you look at Logan, now you have a guy that's got a full year under his belt. He is directionally correct on his performance. He's now within, like I say, 2 or 3 tenths of Albon. I mean, he had a track limits violation, but I mean, in Q1 yesterday at Abu Dhabi, but he was P3. And if you saw how much he violated the track limits, I mean, if anything, he gained a tenth of a second. I mean, there was nothing there, right? But he violated the track limits. Rules are rules. And so his time was disallowed. But the reality is the dude was going for it, and he was turning some really impressive time. Add a tenth of a second to his lap time. Okay, where would that have put him? Well, that would have probably put him 5th. So, it's like, no, it's pretty impressive.
I agree. I think that it's important for fans to really keep in mind as you're evaluating, especially because it's so much of the new fan knowledge base, I think, comes from social media and people just
Yep.
not having the knowledge that someone like you as a racer has, and the longevity in the sport, and so many other reasons why I really appreciate our conversations. Which leads me to my last question. Is, if I'm a new fan, what should I keep in mind regarding these races, be it Brazil, Las Vegas, and Abu Dhabi, not the whole year, just these three?
Yeah, I mean, these cars are, other than the Red Bull, they seem to be more and more track specific. Like, you would expect a Williams or a Ferrari to go better on a track with long straightaways, like you saw at both Las Vegas and then again at Abu Dhabi, because they're so quick. They're very clean aerodynamically. And so, on the other hand, the Red Bull just seems to work very well everywhere, which is why they are where they're at today, right? Mm-hmm. They're getting ready for the really big Christmas celebration. And so, Singapore was really the only outlier for those guys. And so, it's one of those things where in the case of the Red Bull, you have a very talented driver who is in a car that has a technical advantage that also inspires confidence in at least one of those drivers. And so you get what you get with Max. Mm-hmm. And so he just went out and because he was supremely confident, he just went out and just cruised and collected, really. Mm-hmm. Not to say, I mean, the guy was clearly the fastest, the class of the field, so to speak. But then you look at some of the other cars and it's like take Aston Martin, for example. I mean, they looked really, really good at Interlagos, but they really struggled in Vegas and then again at Abu Dhabi. And I mean, they were, even the commentators are saying, oh yeah, the Aston Martin is the slowest car in a straight line. So for Fernando to finish, I think he finished 6th or 7th today. He's probably feeling pretty good about himself just because he was at such a handicap. So that's the thing that you have to understand as a fan. The cars outwardly look somewhat similar, or they're at least you can kind of split them up into maybe 3, cars that look like the Red Bull or cars that look like the Ferrari, one of those. And then there's the Mercedes that's sitting out there that don't look like any of them. They wind up being track specific unless you're driving a Red Bull.
Well, that's great, Dick. I really appreciate this conversation. So much of this, I think, ties a really good bow onto the month, but also looking at the aggregate of the year, even though that wasn't what we were trying to truly focus on. Hopefully we can have a follow-up conversation on looking at this more from a holistic year perspective, and maybe dive into some of the things that we found interesting from this season. But I think that this is really good. I mean, I walk away hearing you say that over and over in different ways that this is a historic moment in F1 and that Las Vegas was a success. I think we both agree that it's to be determined whether or not that can be repeated and what that will look like. Hopefully F1 will figure that out. They've got to fix
some things.
And then also the Red Bull aspect of this, that dominance. And I think that probably both of those come into the historic moment of F1. Who would have thought? Like, I kept hearing that during Las Vegas, that people would say, never thought this could ever happen, never thought we could do this. Or after the debacle of 40 years ago, 20 years ago,
the racing in the parking lot.
The race in the parking lot. I would never have thought this could happen. So for those who are fans, I hope what they are taking away as the year closes out, for the season at least, that we witnessed something, whether or not you liked it or you didn't like the Red Bull dominance, or whether or not you liked the show versus the sport, it was something unique. And who knows where next year comes, like that's really kind of exciting, and I think worth enjoying or anticipating. And then with some time and distance, we'll probably have even more thoughts to look at this. So Absolutely. Great. Well, I look forward to another conversation, Dick.
Absolutely. So do I.
Okay, friends. What did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, Sabrina@2guys8girlandf1.com. New to the podcast? If so, take some time to catch our earlier episodes. We think if you're a new or casual fan of F1, then you'll benefit from our F1 101 episode.